Hey there, welcome back to A Little More You. I'm so glad you're here today because in this episode, I'm going to be really honest, the topic we're going to talk about here is something that has been kind of weighing on me and sitting on my heart for some time. We're going to talk about relationships, but maybe not in the way that you would expect. We're not going to talk about communication strategies or how to set better boundaries, although I know all of that is super important. We're going to talk about what's underneath that. We're going to talk about what happens to your relationships, all of them, when your nervous system has been running in survival mode more often than in parasympathetic mode. We're going to talk about how to recognize when you've been in that state for a really long time and how it's impacting your relationships. Because for most of us, it's been happening for a really long time. We just didn't even know that that was part of the reason why our relationships were or are the way that they are. I know this one personally, really personally, and I'll share some of that with you today. So if you're new here, thank you so much for being here. This is a space for the woman who is done being who she's supposed to be and ready to step into her truth. This is where we make space to listen inward to the inner wisdom that's already residing within you and bring a little more you into the world. I'm Kendra, your host, and I'm honored to walk this path with you. So let's just start with what is survival mode, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what I'm talking about when I say this. Survival mode isn't just what happens to us after a crisis. It can absolutely be. However, in the world that we live in these days, it's not only for people who've been through some sort of traumatic event. For a lot of us, and I mean a lot of us, survival mode was just Tuesday. Like it was just Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. If you ever felt like you were in a state where you're like, if I can just get to the weekend, if I can just get to the vacation, I'll be okay. That's probably indicative of maybe you being in that survival mode. It's the state that your nervous system lives in when it's learned somewhere along the way, probably in your early childhood, that the world isn't entirely safe, that you can't relax and be yourself, your true self, that you have to stay alert to everyone else in your surroundings, how other people are reacting. And it may have created an environment where love felt conditional to you. Like if you showed up in particular ways, you would be loved. But if you didn't, you might not feel loved or safe or comfortable being yourself. And you felt like maybe you had to manage how you interacted and behaved around other people in order to stay, I'll use the word safe or feeling okay. And when you grow up in that, or maybe you didn't grow up in that, but you experience life circumstances over and over and over and over again that keep pushing you into that survival mode, and you stay there for long periods of time, your whole system begins to reorganize around this question. How do I keep myself safe right now? What does safety feel like for me? And a lot of us, including me, it's not how do I stay safe from like these horrible bad things happening to me in the world? Some of it, maybe sometimes, but it's this underlying feeling of I don't feel safe in the situations that seem benign, seem simple, seem like they shouldn't make me stressed out, but they do. I was personally never taught what true safety feels like in my body and specifically in relationships. That was not something that I was taught from a young age. And maybe you can relate with that. And if you can, certainly let me know in the comments. I would love to know if that's something that feels like it resonates with you. And that feeling of never really truly feeling safe shapes how you show up in the world for yourself and as you interact with everyone you meet, everyone, even the stranger on the street or the lady who's checking you out at the grocery store or, the potential partner that you might spend the rest of your life with. Not because you're selfish or you don't care, but because your nervous system, if it's in survival mode, doesn't have the capacity for true connection. And I'll explain what I mean by that a little bit as we go on. I actually remember a time when I was probably in my, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s, maybe. And I remember I started to witness some of my own patterns in relation to this conversation. And one day I was in the elevator at work with someone who was trying to just chat me up in the elevator like some people do. And all I could think in the back of my mind was just stop talking. Just stop talking. Please stop talking. And I texted my boyfriend at the time after I left that elevator, and I was like, I realize now why I struggle to meet new people or make new friends. It's not that I don't care. It's not that I don't want to care. It's that I don't have the capacity to manage anything more than what I have to get done today. And that was because I was living in survival mode. I remember that moment so vividly because it made such an impact on my ability to see and witness my patterns and my behaviors. And when you're in that survival mode, your whole being is way too busy just trying to survive. It doesn't have the room, the space, the capacity to take in or experience true connection in relationships. It's out there trying to scan for threats, manage outcomes, people please, be productive, get shit done, keep the peace, trying to hold it all together so everything doesn't fall apart. Very restrictive state that doesn't allow you to open up and really truly be in relationship or be present with other people. So here's how I've seen this show up in my own life and also in the women I work with. I share a lot on this podcast about my own personal experiences, primarily because, I don't feel comfortable sharing other people's experiences, but my personal experiences resonate with the people that I work with, and they may have not exactly the same, but very similar experiences. And if you feel that this resonates with you, like I said, let me know in the comments. Here's how I've seen this show up in my relationships. You might find it difficult to maybe make new friends, okay? That might be the first thing. And specifically, you might find it difficult to form or maintain really, really long-term relationships or friendships or spouses. Your nervous system is desperately looking for relationships that will help it feel safe. Maybe you do make friends easily. Maybe you're not like me and you make friends easily, but you might find yourself maybe keeping the score without meaning to, tracking how other people, not tracking like literally tracking, but noticing and paying attention to how other people show up for you. And are they showing up in a way that creates safety for you? Or maybe they show up in that way in the beginning, but it trickles off over time. You're not tracking it out of malice, but because your system is trying to calculate, am I safe here all the time? You're doing it within those relationships on a regular basis. And if you start to feel that like that person's ability to make you feel safe starts to drop off a little bit, you might find that you withdraw from that person. You stop being in proximity with that person. You stop going to events that that person's putting on. You stop showing up for that person because that person's not creating what you need, which was safety. And when you stop showing up, it's not an indication that you don't want connection. It's not even an indication that you don't want connection with this person, but it's because relationships are reciprocal. And if you have very little to give this other person, and this other person is maybe declining in their ability to keep you safe, you just start to pull back. And this is definitely a pattern that I have experienced in my life and that I have witnessed other women that I work with go through this experience. You might start to really withdraw when other people stop creating this safety for you. When you're in survival mode, you really do feel like you have nothing left to give. I feel like I've said that so many times. My husband and I have both said that to each other and about each other and as individuals. You're exhausted to your core because regular daily life and daily living has taken all that you have from you. And the only way to keep going for you is to retreat, to pull back, to need people less, to ask for less, to quietly disappear from social interactions or relationships. And I want to name something here before we go on because I think it matters. For some of us, that pulling back isn't only a survival mode, it is also just who we are. I am a super introvert. I need solitude to restore and replenish my energy. But when you are already exhausted by a life that's just running you ragged and depleting your energy, the alone time stops being about like, this is my preference. I'm an introvert. I know I need to restore. I take my time and then I go back into the world. It starts feeling more like a way to survive. And the only way you can survive is to pull back, is to retreat, is to a certain extent hide. So the tricky part is learning the difference that, I in need of rest, restore, and then go back out into the world? Or am I truly hiding from the world as a survival coping strategy? The question you can ask yourself is, am I honoring a need that I have for some quiet time right now? Or am I slowly disappearing from being with people and being a part of community and being in relationship with people? And underneath all of that, there's this truth that's really hard to say out loud, but I'm going to do it anyway. When we're in that state, that survival state, we're not truly in relationship with other people. You get what you need from that relationship until it doesn't serve you in that way anymore, and then you begin to withdraw and look for another person who can help you meet that need. Unless you do this deep work to fill that need yourself. So I'll share just a little bit of my story with you. I don't say this lightly, but for most of my life, generally, going way back to childhood, I've been living in survival mode. I won't go into all the details of why I feel like I was living in that, but I will just say two things. Number one, I know now that I was constantly being asked to live my life out of alignment with my truth and my rhythms and how I naturally show up in this world. So that was the first thing that kind of put me immediately in survival mode from a young age. I'll give you an example of that. Like I already told you I'm an introvert, but we live in an extroverted world. I'm a left-handed person who lives in a right-handed world. I'm a person who needs a lot of sleep and I am a napper, but I went to regular old high school and was exhausted by the end of the day. I'm also a woman who has cycles and our energy fluctuates different than the 24-hour cycle. And I think for anyone who is like me, living in that environment and going to school and public school and having to show up every day, Monday through Friday, you can hear it in my expression here. It was exhausting. And then the second thing is, in my childhood home, while it was not a horrible experience, we did have complications, which I'm sure all families do, but I did experience a very contentious divorce between my parents. And my mom remarried. And so we had a blended family for a while. And I never really had an experience in my home of really, truly feeling completely safe and open and allowed to be and express my full true self in my home. So, with that being said, my nervous system learned at a very young age that safety wasn't something that I could expect or count on in the relationships closest to me. So, it did what nervous systems do, and it kept me safe. It adapted. And here I sit at 46 years old, about to be 47 as I'm recording this. And I've done and I'm doing the hard work of learning how to align my life to my truth and be able to show up and express my true self to the world around me and get out of this chronic survival mode. And as I do, I'm looking back at my relationships throughout my life and realizing a couple of different ways that I've adapted how I show up in my world because of this never having learned or experienced what true safety means in relationships. The first way my nervous system has adapted for me is that I developed some pretty good social anxiety, and I've always had trouble, even since like middle school, in initial reactions with new people. And I think that stems from a fear of not knowing if this person was going to be able to create or help me feel safe in that relationship. And I felt a little bit exposed, I guess you could say. I felt vulnerable in any new situation because I wasn't sure if this person was going to be able to fill that need for me. So, over the course of my life, I always found it difficult to go to new places and meet new people. And over time, I stopped going to places unless I absolutely had to. If it wasn't related to work and like doing my job, I just stopped showing up to meet new people. I withdrew from the world and society because it was just too much. Now, there were other reasons for that, and I won't go into all of it, but for the last, I don't know, 11 years, my family has gone through a lot of loss, a lot of hardship, and that does also create an environment where you might need to retreat. We also all had COVID, which retreat. We all were limiting our social interactions during that time. So for sure, those things impacted, my ability to get out in the world and meet new people. But what I've noticed is after experiencing all of that and trying to go out and then kind of reintegrate into society, I still had this underlying feeling of fear when meeting new people because I didn't know if it felt safe. Because I never really experienced a lot of safety in those interactions. And so I wasn't sure whether or not these people would be able to help me create the safety I needed. The second way my nervous system has adapted to this need is that when I do get into relationships with friends or partners or coworkers, whatever it is, I now realize that for me, they were all a way for me to get what I needed. And that sounds a little bit harsh when I say it out loud, but I also think looking back, it's probably the truth. I say it with a lot of compassion for my younger self, for the version of me that came before today, because I know that we do the best we can in the circumstances we're in with the information and the resources that we have at the time. And I don't blame myself for all of that. I didn't have the capacity to actually be in communion, in true relationships with other people, not really. I was too busy trying to survive in a world that didn't feel like safety to me. And now that I've had time to tend to my nervous system and learn what it feels like to feel safe in my own body, I am starting to realize what has been happening throughout my whole life in relation to my relationships and how I was showing up in them. And I need to say this out loud too. I've been to a lot of therapy in my life. I like to go deep into these conversations. I like to discover like why we do the things that we do. I like to understand it. But until I was able to take myself out of survival mode, I wasn't able to process it in my own body. And so I have to say that because I was in therapy for a really long time trying to figure this all out. And it didn't click until I addressed this survival mode thing. I just don't know if it's possible to address how we show up in the world at all until we address this conversation of survival mode. So this realization I've had as I've come out of survival mode, it's not something that I am ashamed of. It's something that I'm meeting with a lot of compassion for my little self, for my nervous system, for holding me in whatever way that was needed in order to try to create safety. Because I understand that for the first time, and maybe the first time really ever, that my body was doing what it needed to do to try to keep me safe. So how can you start to maybe, if you're feeling any of this, how can you start to recognize in your own life how that survival mode is impacting your relationships? So I want to offer you a couple of questions here to just sit with, not to judge yourself. Again, a lot of compassion here, just to get curious. So do you find yourself needing another person, whether that person is a friend or a coworker or a spouse, a partner? Do you find yourself needing that other person to show up for you in a very particular way, to give you something that you feel like you can't get on your own, that you lack internally? Specifically, does the other person fill a need that you have to feel safe? Like for me, I'm an introvert, so I really love hanging out with people who are extroverts, and I attract them because then they can take me to all these events and introduce me to people, and it creates this nice little buffer for me not to have to engage in those experiences where I have to have that, first initial reaction. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with other people being able to fill this need sometimes. I don't think that'll ever go away. My desire to hang out with extroverts, I think that'll always be there. The deeper question that I want you to consider here is, am I also able to contribute to that other person's needs in order to be in relationship with them? And if they can't show up for me in that moment in the way that I need them to, does that change the perception of our relationships within my own mind? Does them not being able to fill that gap change our relationship? And if it does, then I might be looking for them to fill something that I can't fill myself. And that's the conversation that we need to have, is how do we fill that for ourselves? So if you've been so focused on staying okay, like figuring out a way to stay okay, that you feel like you've lost touch with the deeper, real, true intimacy, real belonging, real rest inside and presence inside a relationship with another person, then there's a good chance you're probably living in survival mode and your relationships are being impacted by that. I want to end this podcast with some thoughts on what changes when you start to heal. Like what can you expect when you take the time to move out of survival mode, learn how to find safety in your own body, and then figure out how to be in relationship with other people? At that point, your relationships begin to shift, not because the other people have changed, but because you have. You start to show up instead of trying to perform in order to get what you need. You start to give instead of just trying to receive. You start to choose relationships from a place of genuine desire for connection, not just from this desperate need to fill a gap or a hole that you have. For me and for what I see with clients, and this is true of really all the work that I do, it's not a flip the switch, oh, I'm not in survival mode anymore, and so my relationships are better. This is a lifelong process of moving ourselves out of survival mode and changing our experience in life so that we can live according to our truest and most authentic self. And with that comes less survival mode. So this is not a fast moving experience. This is typically very gradual. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen overnight. But there's been moments where I've noticed, and I mentioned one earlier, like that elevator moment where you start to notice once I step out of survival mode, I actually genuinely and deeply want to be in conversation with others. And I've noticed that I start to get curious, more curious about what other people need and what other people want and how I can be of service to them because I have more capacity to be of service to them. And I'm actually able to be fully present with other people without immediately calculating whether or not this is going to help me be safe because I already feel safe in my own body and I don't need someone else to make me feel safe. So that's what's possible when you start to do this work. Not perfect relationships. Relationships with other humans are still hard, but real ones, deep ones, ones that you're present in, ones where you can actually be yourself in, and ones where you actually meet the other person where they are and they can meet you where you are. So it all starts with living in alignment with your truth. And that creates space for you to then begin to heal your nervous system. I feel like for the decade that I was in the most heightened survival mode of my life because of the experiences we were going through, do what you can if you're experiencing big life changes like divorce, like my experience of I lost a daughter, she was stillborn. My stepdaughter lost her mom. We lost jobs. We lost my dad. We lost my husband's dad. When you're going through things like that, survival mode is normal, okay? Like you're not supposed to be able to show up or have capacity for other people in those moments. What I'm talking about here is those moments where you're living in survival mode for the majority of your life because you're not living in alignment with your truth and your rhythms and your authenticity. That's what I'm talking about here. That's where I help people create that alignment so that survival mode can dissipate just a bit and you're able to create more space and more capacity for other people. So if any of that resonated with you, if you heard yourself in any of this conversation today, I would love to invite you to download my free 10-day True You Reset. It is totally free. It is 10 short audios with some practices built in to help you reconnect with your inner wisdom and your truth, your body, your voice, your inner knowing, so that everything else, including your relationships, has a chance to start to shift. You can grab that in the link below. It's free, like I said, it's super gentle. It's an easy way to get started with reconnecting to your truth. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you always for being willing to show up and have these deep conversations, these tender conversations with me. It certainly takes courage to keep listening. And as always, when we wrap up this podcast, notice what resonates with you, what feels true for you in this moment, if anything, and let that guide you gently forward. Until next time, may your days be guided by your inner wisdom and filled with a little more you.